Live. Take it
Okay.
away.
And let me see here. Close a few things here. And then gonna share this.
So he wasn't really
He
ready.
wasn't really ready.
No, no,
That's the moral of the
it's
story.
the last little details here. That, and then that, and that. And there we are. Our little Kindred Spirits incubator group is what this is some of these weeks. And next week, let's see, we're not going to do this ABT group on Wednesday. That's because I will be in Atlanta at Emory University, where we are running the ABT course for the fourth consecutive fall semester. They love it there. We're really doing great stuff with them. And so this is my first time going there to do it in person for a session. But also that I'm giving this departmental seminar thing here, which they're very excited. They're apparently getting a lot of signups. And Emory University is located right, the CDC is almost on campus for Emory. And so it's right next door. And so they apparently have got a lot of people from CDC signing up to come to this thing. So the discussion that goes with it ought to be interesting. Um, what the heck? God, was this some new draft they did? They did of Zoom because this window keeps jumping around when I try and move it. All
Randy, I don't know if it's too late, but there's a typo in this.
in what?
Oh, never mind. The
Oh no,
previous,
no, sorry, that it is too late. It's not too late because they already caught that. And notice
got
what
it.
I did. Oh, God, leave it to Charles, the one guy to catch the typo. Notice what I did there in the lower left. Do you see it, Charles? Just for you. Look at that. Look up there, it says eyesights. And knowing that they, on the official one, this was a draft they sent me 2 weeks ago. I couldn't find the official one. I thought I'm going to go ahead and use this one. Nobody will notice when I've got it broad wide like that. Um, okay, so yeah, here is the talk that I will be giving. Narrative rules, principles, storytelling from Hollywood are now essential for the success of communication medicine, science medicine. Um, and doggone this thing. Learn about the ABT and then, but therefore, narrative framework and how it can address three most important challenges in communication today: singularity, stakes, and audience, as well as how a century of knowledge from Hollywood storytelling provides key insights for successful communication. See that right there? That's the element that's missing from their whole dumb communication, climate communication symposium thing they're about to do. Is that it's that element of all this knowledge that comes from Hollywood that you need somebody who's bilingual, which is what I went off and spent 30 years of my life doing, was learning the two languages so I could lift this knowledge out of Hollywood and translate it into the science community. And then you end up with this whole group that because they don't understand it themselves, they're intimidated by it and they don't want anything to do with it. And so I've just been kind of banished from the whole climate community, which is fine with me. Okay, but anyhow, Matthew, you want to put the link in the chat window? That's we'll be sending out next week, but everybody can RSVP if you want to tune in this talk and be really good if any of you can make it on Thursday. At what time is it at, Matthew?
12 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, so 9 in the morning Western, and just because it'd be great to have a discussion the next week of how things went there and how this discussion, this talk went with all of them, see if anything interesting happens with it. All right, so in terms of what we're here to focus on for this hour is our narrative analysis team, of which that's what all of you are members there. You may recognize yourself at the table. And it's really continuing to use this tool, which we're going to do a redesign on it sometime soon. We're kind of gathering thoughts and ideas. If any of you have some, if you want to go and look at it and send us an email with some thoughts on what it ought to have on the page, anything like that, it won't be much of a change because it's working pretty well. And we're not getting complaints about it's broken. It's as simple as just copy, paste, and click by putting your content in there. And this is something we've been spending a lot of time now. Um, Liz and I, in particular, have been analyzing these documents. We've been doing this narrative knockdown thing. And I think what we're getting is a more refined assessment of what's in the word and in these documents and this metrics, the and frequency, and others, Andy Reynolds and other folks that are really, and Charles, you guys have been analyzing lots of different things. Um, in the beginning, all these things start with very simple patterns or beliefs that and is just a word of boringness that needs to be minimized and reduced. And then as we work with it more and more, we get more nuanced understanding. Wait a second. And is actually, I think, almost an indicator of humanity to some extent. And one of the things we see with and is that we got three characters who score incredibly low, ridiculously low on the and frequency. So by now, everybody in this group knows that there's an optimum for it, which is 2.5%. And that's pretty well supported in all sorts of things. And we've got our own data for feature articles in the New Yorker and the Atlantic and things like that. And they converge incredibly over and over again on 2.5%. So we know that's an optimum for some reason. Is it an actual mechanical optimism or optimum, or is it just the mean of everything averaged out across a wide range? Who knows? But now thinking about 2.5, all of a sudden you drop down under 2.0, and we've got three characters that average way the hell down there. And they are Michael Crichton, for starters, and then Jeremy Faust, the editor-in-chief of MedPage, and then Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate for economics, who is got a Substack thing that every single day he posts on Substack. He's got a big long essay. And we began looking at the metrics of those two guys in all of their editorials. And lo and behold, they have both of them average up in the mid 40s, which is just stunning for the narrative index. And then at the other end, their and frequency is way the hell down there. And increasingly, what we think is that that's reflective of a lack of humanity. They're not taking the time to set up the context of what their arguments are. They're jumping right in there and just arguing fiercely. And Crichton was known for this, for his novel writing, which was he was not good at the human elements. His characters were referred to as stick figures. He didn't do much description on them. He just got characters in there and had them chasing after dinosaurs or whatever. So he was all action and dialogue at the expense of the more human stuff. Then when we start looking at a lot of novels, you start to see a lot of the great novels are up there around 3 to 3.5 for their and frequency. And then some, Hemingway actually had an active habit of using and as a tool and descriptively saying the day was long and the water was calm and everybody was out there and. And he used that as a tool, and that reflects in him having over 4% for some of his novels. But the interesting thing that we ran into with the narrative metrics was that we saw way up there with those two guys in the 40s who are just kind of arguing day in and day out, and nothing in there is beautifully written or anything like that. It's not prose. It's just arguments about this and this and this and this. And then you see someone like Maureen Dowd. We were a little surprised to see that she scored around 3.2 or something like that. So kind of above the optimum. And I think that that's because she's really good at context and writing things that do reach inside of people a little bit, and they've got more of a human element. So that's where we are with the and stuff. Okay, now
I'm
here's
sorry, Randy,
Yeah.
can I interject?
Yeah.
So a lot of language and communication is structuring the language so that the ideas fit together in the correct order. And has a crucial function. It connects two ideas. The day was hot, the sun was shining. Or the sun was shining and the day was hot, in a fundamental way, connects those two ideas into a hierarchy, into a single unit. And so and has that structural role, which essentially making ideas, giving more complex relationships between them. And so it's not just a humanity thing, it's
Okay,
a structural element.
I'm going to argue back against you, but keep going.
No, that's my point, is that it has
Okay.
a crucial structural element in terms of organizing ideas in a prose
Okay,
statement.
so let me now toss out one of the things I ran into with the guy from World Bank who wrote that study that we cited a lot in 2015 about the crazy use of the word and in the World Bank reports that are so unreadable and bank speak and everything like that. And they published that in 2015. That was where I first learned of this optimum thing. They mentioned the Longman study from 1999 that was all these tons and tons of metrics that were just, it was a very inductivist study. They did not have hypotheses they were testing with it. It was the beginnings of the world corpus of literature where everything was starting to get digitized in the late 90s. And these guys started going in this big project and just counting everything here and there, looking for patterns rather than having clear, hypotheses. That's where the 2.5% thing seems to originate. They called it the academic optimum for the use of and. So these guys in 2015 had cited that. And then when I talked to the lead author, Franco Moretti, who had retired by then, was in Switzerland, and we had he's a really fun guy, talked for like half an hour. But what he said when I started trying to talk to him about narrative structure, he had no idea what I was talking about. You know, he didn't know. I said and, but, there, and whatever. He didn't even really know what was meant by narrative structure. But their interpretation of it, he and his co-author, was he said we saw the word and being used as a tool of agreement to glue together all these potentially contradictory chunks of material simply by they say this and this country says this and over here they say this and he said quite often if you looked more closely at it, you saw actually it would have been better to have a but in there. It was contradiction. You know, there would be a paragraph or a sentence that said, and jobs are great for the environment, and jobs destroy the environment that, and preserving the environment is great for jobs, and preserving the environment comes at the cost of jobs. And so you'd have two contradictory statements that are glued together with and people's brains just don't pick up on it because that's a cueing word. You know, the but activates the brain like, oh, wow, I see those two things are contradictory. I don't think that people read with that much precision. They kind of scan along and those words end up playing a role. I'm making this up, so I'm going along and arguing this, but I wonder to what extent you're arguing for a really fine scale power and strength of the word and I'm arguing that it's more gloss over type of word that people just aren't scrutinizing.
Well,
much.
it can have multiple uses, right? And it can also be used well or badly. But if you compare, for example, Dowd and Krugman, it could be that Dowd is taking a little extra time to structure her ideas a little more carefully, whereas Krugman just has to pound it out and he's not taking that extra time. So in that sense, the lack of and may be just a lack of that extra level of structuring the language
Okay,
carefully for the idea.
that's hypothesis number one. Hypothesis number two is that Krugman just doesn't even care about setup. He's so deep into problem, and she does care about setup and there. Is that different from what you're saying a little tiny bit?
That would just be a
Variation of it.
reflection on a larger scale of the same idea of taking more time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyhow, either way, we're still learning, and you know, as I keep saying week after week, there's no arguing the numbers when we see these patterns. It's just interpretation. That's why this group is so good now at this as a working group to be thinking about it. What exactly are we looking at here? Because it hasn't really. I mean, if you consider that it was 99 when the Longman thing identified that as an optimum, and then 2015 when those guys mentioned it. And then even still, I talked to all these journalists and they've never even heard of anybody counting ands and seeing any value in there. So this is a piece of data that we've kind of come across that we see possibly tells you a lot of stuff because we're thinking in narrative terms. All right, now here's just a little separate thing that's kind of fun. I'm labeling this contradiction sensitivity. Let's see as a group how this hits everybody. But this is in the Hollywood Reporter this morning. I'm at the point now where I have programmed my brain so deeply for 15 years on and buts and therefores that I'm really sensitized to how they play in text. And so take a look at this. This is a review this morning of In Whose Name, a documentary chronicling Kanye West's chaos that you never asked for. Filmmaker Nick Ballesteros follows the hip hop superstar for 6 years through marital troubles with Kim Kardashian, anti-Semitic outbursts, and a budding relationship with Donald Trump. Notice that the title says a chronicle that you never asked for. That's kind of sounding like a bad review. Like, why do we really have to sit through this thing? So we're already kind of off in that direction. So we already know what this thing ought to be saying. But now look at the first two sentences that this is what throws me. Here's the first sentence of the text. The prospect of spending nearly 2 unfiltered hours with Kanye West should fill anyone with dread. Matthew, can you say what what would you take a shot at the next sentence being after that? Prospect of spending nearly 2 unfiltered hours, Kanye West should fill anyone with dread. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted. I would guess a but.
Yeah, and where would you go with the but?
Prospect. So it's setting up in one direction, but actually what we see is this is actually a wonderful runaway ride that is hugely enjoyable.
Okay, have I shared this with you before right now?
No, this is the
Oh,
first I'm seeing this.
Exactly. All right, so brace yourself. Now let's see if this doesn't cause the same sort of, this does not compute in your brain that it did with me.
Okay.
Here's the next sentence.
What? What?
Wow. Is it just you and me, or does anybody else in this group find that awkward, weird? Like maybe we're getting overly sensitized to the power and importance of logical structure, but that's what's going on here. And basically, to summarize what he's doing here is he's saying this ought to be a problem, but it is.
Could be Leonard Bernstein has a famous quote where he said, some people call me a liberal, bleeding heart, gay do-gooder, but that's just exactly what I am. And that's a similar use of
Okay,
it.
interesting. All
I
right, now,
mean, it's
Yeah.
it's using but deliberately as an
okay,
ironic.
no, I got you
Yeah,
I got you
Charles,
on
I'm
that.
starting to pick up that vibe too. Yeah, yeah.
Is that how this is playing here?
Yeah, exactly. This is almost a punchline, Randy. It's setting you up for exactly what we were expecting, but then it goes the opposite direction.
Yeah, I've seen that used, just another way of agreeing with you. It's they call me this, but that's only because it's true.
Yeah.
Man.
And that said, I don't think this works. If this is attempting to turn that particular bridge trick,
Yeah, right,
then
right.
I don't think he's pulled he's a couple of spades short of winning the round here.
I think I'm following everything that all three of you are saying exactly.
I think it's assuming that people have watched it or are watching it, and therefore it's implicit that despite the dread, people are watching it.
Let me read it again. Matthew, why don't you read it to us, the whole text there?
Sure. The prospect is
What did you lock up?
I'm going to agree with Michael
spending
on
nearly
this.
2 unfiltered documentary, 6 years.
Hang on, Matthew. You locked up for me at least. How about do it again?
Oh, yeah, my internet connection was unstable for a sec. Okay, I'm back. The prospect of spending nearly 2 unfiltered hours with Kanye West should fill anyone with dread. But that's exactly what you get with Nicola Bestro's documentary, 6 years in the making and edited down from some 3,000 hours of raw footage.
It really doesn't work for me. I can't believe an editor would be comfortable with that. And now here's the irony is look in this same paragraph, there's 2 more sentences. Look what you get in these other 2 sentences. This documentary portrait of the hip hop superstar certainly delivers what it promises, an unflinching look showcasing a subject many inner demons. But for those not fascinated by the twists and turns of Yee's clearly disturbed mind, in whose name makes for a painful viewing experience. So the logic of that second half is exactly standard, normal, what we would expect, and it flows just fine. It's just weird, whatever in the world the thinking was on the first thing. And I think you're being very generous to give them that it's that version that you said, Charles, which we do follow. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this one makes me think of, it's often attributed to Abe Lincoln, but it's one of those aphorisms we probably don't know who said it. It's like, if that's for people who like this sort of thing, this is the sort of thing they'll like.
Yeah.
You know? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
if you want to do this, you'll like it, but if you don't, you won't. Yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock. Like I get that.
Yeah, well,
what I asked
sure.
in the thing though is the but that's what you get. Are they talking about the dread or that you get 2 unfiltered hours of Kanye West?
In terms of the first 2 sentences?
In the first 2 sentences, when they say it still doesn't work very well, but is the but not about the fact that there's dread, but the fact that you get 2 unfiltered hours of Kanye West?
Oh yeah.
So it's not that you're filled with dread is the but, it's that it would fill you with dread, but you're going to get 2 unfiltered hours of Kanye West.
It's so weird.
No, you're right.
It's so bad. It doesn't work.
You're right. And if they reversed it, it should fill you with dread to spend nearly 2 hours, unfiltered hours with Kanye West, but that's exactly what you will get. Then it would almost make sense. That's well.
Oh, I see.
Which still makes the whole thing badly phrased, but I wonder if that's what the but is about.
Maybe that's what they were trying to get at. Or it's hard. Maybe it's not worth parsing this editor's brain.
Yeah, I don't know. At the risk of piling on, right? He says the prospect should fill anyone with dread, and then in the bottom paragraph he says, "But wait a minute, he's countenancing the possibility that some people aren't filled with dread." Right? This thing does what it says on the tin, which you get to spend 2 hours inside Kanye's brain. And I'm back to what I said before. And if that's appealing to you, then this is for you. But this author thinks you're an idiot for wanting such torture.
So, Charles, is this how you would flip that first sentence, possibly, and make it work a little more functional?
Well, to Albie's point, she brought it up, but it should fill anyone with dread.
Yeah, you could
to
say
spend or to spend 2 unfiltered hours with this person. But that's exactly what you get with this documentary. And then but's, there's no contradiction there. I mean, but's not being used properly, but it kind of makes more sense in some weird way.
Okay, so in the end, I think what I would attribute all this to, it's like a double negative type of communication, which academics love. You know, they love their double and triple negatives. You know, it's not that I wouldn't say that that isn't what would happen. They love to communicate like that, challenge their brains on multiple contradictory levels, and it just isn't good communication. Welcome to the climate communication world of my rant this morning. So anyhow, there it is.
I mean, I really like saying, but still Nico Ballesteros decided to go ahead and make the documentary, you know?
Yeah, I see how you're saying it there. You probably shouldn't be doing something like this, but he did go ahead and do it that way.
Randy, what if you if you went back to your original and just replaced the but with an and? Then it makes complete sense.
Let me try that. The prospect spending nearly 2 hours unfiltered with Kanye West should fill anyone with dread. And that's exactly what you get with this documentary. Oh, that's pretty interesting.
We've discovered the reverse rule of replacement.
Yes. See, that's how important these connector words are. That just changed the whole chemistry of the thing by going from a but to a word of agreement that suddenly, and that's exactly what you get. Everybody see that? That's kind of cool. All right, enough time on that thing. But anyhow, you can see how it stumped my brain this morning. Like, what the hell? And this is what it resulted in for me.
Does not compute. Does not compute. Does not compute.
All right, that's my ABT brain nowadays. Okay, now we're going to dive into some content here. And we've got 2 big chunks. This is stuff from Julie Clausen I'm going to present. And then we've got Liz got stuff she's going to present. And this is, Julie had this all ready to go last week, and we never got around to it because we got so caught up with the music stuff, which was really awesome. And I've actually shared that with a few friends since then. They found that really discussion interesting. And now 3 simple rules for today. And that's a lot of what we're doing here these days. And that's why this is a great little working group, is just making these things up as we go along, testing them out. Does it seem to be a rule? So Mike is going to talk for a minute here about his basic rule of leave dead material alone. If you have a famous author and they die and you discover in the vault some novel, leave it alone, and our metrics can show you why you should leave it alone. Then after that, we're going to get into Julie's stuff about groups are bad news and yet groups are essential. Okay, so there we go. Leave dead material be. Mike, take it away. Mike Strauss on dead authors.
Okay. I want to start with something that, Randy, I hadn't told you about because I just found it. I asked a question of our friend ChatGPT, why the posthumous writings of Tolkien were so bad or were not very clear. And among them, its lengthy answer was the one that I thought was essential, which is many of the materials used for these publications were works in progress and never intended for public release in their raw state.
Wow.
In the case of Crichton, there are 2. One is Pirate Latitudes, which is on the screen. Pirate Latitudes was found as a complete manuscript in his papers and has since come out posthumously. I purchased a first edition copy of it in a used bookstore in perfect condition for $4. Looked it up online and found out that I can sell it for somewhere between $3.50 and $4. So I've got a valuable first edition, maybe some year. The problem that I ran into reading that as I read it through was it was an interesting story, but it was a series of each chapter had a problem in it and a solution. But I got to the end and nothing was stitched together, and it really felt a lot like Crichton was sort of experimenting on what kinds of storylines he could use. So there's one chapter where they fight off a giant squid. There's another chapter where they break into a pirate lair. There's another chapter, it's just on and on. There's one character that is really a woman disguised as a man, and it so it's lots of little stories, but there's nothing that really, if you think back to things like Jurassic Park and Timeline, there's nothing that runs through the whole thing. You get to the end and it's sort of, okay, well, everybody just goes on their merry way. And let me see the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. So then this is Mike had me dig this up.
Yeah.
These are iconic two paragraphs from Frank Danielle, the guy who started the whole ABT thinking in 1986. This is a speech that my buddy Marty Kaplan at USC managed to discover from Frank Danielle, the great screenwriting instructor. And then he gave rise to a bunch of graduate students. And I'm pretty sure one of his students taught screenwriting at University of Colorado. And that's where the South Park guys learned of this dynamic from back then. 2011 is when they talked about it in their documentary, and that's when I caught up on it. And then I converted it from the rule of replacing this kind of outlines into the ABT. And so here was what Frank Danielle had said, which he's talking about screenwriting, but you all know, every one of us here has written plenty of stuff, and this is the basic dynamic. Monotony is first problem in first drafts. There's several reasons for it. One usually is the fact that the scenes follow in the forbidden pattern, and then, and then, and then. And so in a first draft, you're just gluing together exactly what Mike's talking about here. A whole bunch of things that happen. Then this happened, then this happened, this happened. In such a case, immediately you have monotony. That's what you're saying about Pirate Latitudes.
Yeah.
Dramatic story, the pattern usually for the connecting scenes is and then, but, therefore, but, and towards the culmination, meanwhile. If you don't have this but and therefore connection between the parts, the story becomes linear, monotonous. Diaries and chronicles are written that way, but not scripts. And the same thing goes on in the science world, which is that laboratory journals are written that way. Here's all the different experiments we did. But when it comes time to write a manuscript, the journal, the publication forces you into their template with their writer's guidelines. And that's where you make this transition. This is so universal, these two paragraphs. And this is at the core of my Houston book, pretty much. So yeah, back to you, Mike.
Yeah, and what I realized as you read that, it hadn't hit me, is that that's the Pirate Latitudes is really a chronicle of the main character's life for several years. So it's this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So it really fits that. The other Crichton book was Micro. And Liz and I listened to that as we drove from here in Texas to California about a year ago, and got about halfway through it, and then our trip ended. I said, "Well, I got to finish this. It was really interesting," and I went out and bought the book, found where we had finished listening, and started listening. And from that point, which was, Liz, I think it was about 2/3 of the way through the book, would you say? Something like that.
Actually, I want to say it was about halfway.
Yeah, or about half.
I think we hadn't hit a certain charter death yet in it that I think was one of the.
But
we talk later about that. So yeah.
So I got the book and I started reading it, and it got boring, basically.
Okay, and on that note, let's suspend it there, and then let me go through this Julie Clausen stuff, and then we'll come to Liz, and she'll dive into it. Right? Does that make sense, Liz? You'll pick up from there. So, okay, good. That's a good intro on leave dead people's material alone. Don't publish it. And so this is what Julie had sent me last week. She was ready to give. She's at her daughter's wedding right now. And so she was going to try and tune in. And I said, why don't you just let us do the discussion? We'll record it and you can watch it as we give homage and praise to you for all of the great work she's been doing on ABT stuff. So basically, one of the points in what she's got to say here is put at the simplest of all levels. Groups are bad news. We'll get into that. From the wonderful Julie Clausen, for those of you who don't know her, she is, here's a little bio of her that I found this morning. And she's been part of our group for, I think, about 5 years. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, she took the course and then instantly caught fire. She got the ABT. I mean, just some of these people, it's a first moment. Like, I get it. And I've known it, like Andy Reynolds talks about the Nightingale song. You've lived your whole life knowing this stuff. You just hadn't heard somebody finally sing it. And once you do, then you really catch fire. In her case, she works in the world of fisheries. And she ended up organizing the American Fisheries Society, that we've done 2 runs with them with something called their Climate Ambassadors, where they take a group of 25 scientists and train them on communication stuff for the year. And she got them to start the year with the ABT training, and that's been transformative. The result is they use it all the rest of the year in the other exercise they do. And notice just this profile of here, which is very accurate. I think fish sister profile, Julie Clausen from fisheries biologist to inspiring science communicator. For our May fish sister profile, we're highlighting another fantastic woman of fisheries. And she's done lots of great stuff, but mostly she brings a ton of really good energy. And that is crucial in broad communication in particular, to try and reach mass audiences. They pick up on the human elements like that. So here this morning, I asked her to give me a few more words of explanation of these slides I'm going to share with you, but they're really good. She says, I've really been focusing on the missed opportunity. If I'm writing just okay material, it's a missed opportunity. If people don't remember what I presented, it's a huge missed opportunity. If I want to make a difference, I need to be seriously invested in every opportunity to make people think, feel, act differently. The metrics are a tool that can get me there. And this is part of what we're leading towards eventually, is some sort of article we're going to write with some of us, or who knows what, but start to get this out to people, that this is really, Mike and I were talking about this morning. The metrics are not something you use before you write. You just go ahead and write what you've got, then you analyze it with the metrics, and then that tells you if you're doing a good job or not. And if you get really bad scores, you don't try and go back analytically, and I'm going to put a butt in here and there. You need to rethink overall the way you're approaching everything. Kind of like what Mike was just saying with that Pirate Latitudes. Instead of a laundry list of my chapters, you're missing your overarching ABT, and that translates into that. So here's what she talked about. Some of the questions about the approach. Who's the audience? What's the purpose? What's the problem? And here's one of these that she shared in these slides. And this was the executive summary of this whole big report here, Tomorrow's Catch: Securing Our Future Fisheries. And it's not a huge document. It's only 408 words. The and frequency is ridiculous up there at 7.6. This is what you get with low sample sizes. This is why we usually try and recommend a threshold of 1,000 words, so you don't get wacky numbers that are way off the scale. Usually you don't see anything much over 5. But that said, it's still a reflection of, you're just not putting much contradiction in there. So the narrative index score ended up being a 3, and what she says, soft problem presentation at a time when freshwater and marine ecosystems face mounting threats. The problem is presented like on and on and on. And as she said, that's what it scores: painfully dull and wimpy. So that's a case of recommending they go back and work on that some more. Here's another important document, Living Planet Index. I think this is also the executive summary there. You see the and frequency and 806 words here, so it's getting up to reasonably large sample size. And 4.8, that's still, anything up well above 4, it becomes unreadable. People can't stay focused, I would argue. They're just going on and on and on. And there's just no contradiction. It means there's no problem solution dynamic being argued here. No razor sharp turn of the story. When you look into that, the executive summary here, it says things like the most reported threat for population with local threats, habitat degradation, change, loss, blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't boil it down to what's the main thing going on here. The result is somewhat dull and wimpy and puts you to sleep. And then here's one of her own papers from 2022. So this would have already been written before she even started working with us in the ABT. And taking a look back there, total words for the manuscript, 1,867, and frequency 2.5. So that's very efficient use of the word and now. That's right on the optimum, 2.6, or that's 2.6, and 2.5 is the optimum. But the narrative index is low, and the but count's only 4. Did not use but and relied on terms like the threat and the resulting impact. So the same sort of thing. It's just you need to do a deep dive thinking through about the use of the word but. And I know everybody says that I'd rather use however and rather be more diplomatic. But really, are you aware of that you're doing that? And maybe if you experiment and replace some howevers with buts, you'll actually end up with something a little stronger. The score there was good and wimpy, and there you go. And then here's one more: spawning sanctuaries, and the summary, I think, of this big study. And this one I think is after she's been doing the training, and need to put a but at the start of the problem to emphasize the transition. And so look at the narrative score, 21 there, and again there, frequency Bingo. Good and good. Yay. Okay. So I think that's her overall message, is that she's getting better. And I think the overall message I derive from this is, we've talked about this, what we see in the New York Times. This needs to be established as a clear rule. Everybody has a general intuitive feeling. Yeah, committees tend to be more wishy-washy than single individuals. Well, with the metrics, we can show you quantitatively, analytically, exactly what goes on, which is committees end up way down there and they aren't as powerful as single individuals. That was from the New York Times, their board versus individual essays. And here's what she wrote to me this morning about those documents we were looking at there. Living Planet Index for Migratory Fishes, executive summary of the report. Often that is the only thing that is read or sent out for press releases. It's super duper important. You do all this work, and that's the one thing that's going to translate whether or not it has an impact. The thing about these international reports is that they want to be noticed by the government policymakers. So memorable summary is key. I think one issue is that we had 15 authors providing input and editing this summary, so the impact gets lost. I realize now you need 1 to 2 people with a clear messaging, knowledge, and strategy to keep it focused on the purpose. And I think this is something we need to write up eventually. You know, Mike, I mean, maybe someday I'll get enough of a platform that we could write something in science about it. This is a blanket rule. We can show you quantitatively what the trade-off is. I know inclusiveness is important, and it is, but you need to take all the voices and then filter them through one person who puts it into a singular voice, as opposed to just stapling together everything with the word "and." So anyhow, that's her net result, is that's where she feels right now, is that she finds herself increasingly worshiping the metrics. And then groups are essential. So this is what Mike pointed out this morning. Is kind of interesting. And Liz, if you can get ready to jump in now, that we've just said that groups are bad news there if you do a committee thing like that. And yet Rick Nelson, who couldn't join us here, is usually with us. But he came up with this thing years ago. He loves to tell the story about one day he called me up and he said, I'm working on this thing and I can't get the ands and the buts right and things like that. And then I told him, you're doing it wrong. You know, you can't shape a good narrative by yourself at the desk. You've got to have other people working with you in our working circles model. You've got to be running it through other brains to help you shape it. But that's not the same as a committee where you're trying to pull 15 voices together into a hodgepodge. So that's 2 different dynamics of groups. And on that note, Liz, take it away.
Sure. Can I? There we go.
Yep.
Need to share. All right.
So we got 15 minutes. You got something pretty quick to?
I do.
Yeah.
It's mostly most of what I have is the numbers. So
yes. Awesome.
Mike, aka my dad, just to clarify that now, as he put it, he was we looked at micro, and he came to me afterwards and noticed that micro didn't seem to have quite the level of writing. And so now with the metrics, we were able to go back.
Micro being that novel about what was it about?
People getting shrunk down and then they get trapped in like big bugs. It's okay. Very
okay. All right.
that's the really rough summary of it. Okay?
Yeah. Right.
So again, Micro is a Crichton novel. However, unlike Jurassic Park, say that we know and love, that was Crichton's book, Micro was published posthumously in 2011 with Richard Preston. We don't know how much was completed of the book, but it was not complete when Crichton passed. So looking at just Jurassic Park versus Micro, so one that was exclusively by Crichton and one that was co-authored essentially. Crichton's Jurassic Park, 2.4 and frequency. For chapters under 3 on the and frequency, we had 51, and then the other 10 were over. So most of the book is right in that optimal range on and frequency. And then of course, narrative index, 28% for the whole book, with only 15 chapters coming in at under 20%. The rest of the chapters, and this is a book that's about 61 chapters.
I'm sorry, is 28% mean 28?
It means 28. Yeah, it's not a percent.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
It's 28. Sorry.
Yep.
Mistyped there.
Right.
But it's a narrative index of 28. And then only 15 chapters actually come in under 20 for Jurassic Park, whereas the rest of the book comes in at over 20. And of those 46 chapters that come in at over 20, actually more than half of them come in at over 30. So really reflects what we know of Crichton, which is very strong narrative, very polished on his and frequency.
Lots of action.
Very
I'm
much,
sorry,
very action.
is there a distribution over time? Like, are the early chapters lower narrative index, which is consistent with setting the scene?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah.
There is, I have a different graph on a different thing I can share with you, Charles, if you want to see that later. So I did have the line graph chapters laid out by chapter. So micro, similar in length. So, but again, micro has also was published posthumously. So we don't know how much Crichton specifically wrote of it, but Preston picked it up and finished it, and then the publication. It's actually still pretty close on the and frequency. It's a little bit higher, 2.7, under 3%, or under 3 for the and frequency. There are 36 chapters. The rest of them come in at over 3. And then this is where it started to really show is overall the narrative index was lower. We're looking at an under 20 narrative index. Most of micro, so most of those 54 chapters are under 20, 36 of them. The other 18 are over 20, and only 8 of those are over 30. So right there, and on a trend to your question, Charles, I actually put a chapter by chapter side by side in a line, and in micro, you actually see a downward trend in the narrative index as the book goes along, compared to Jurassic Park, which stays much more steadily in the middle. So, and then last night, last minute, I found a book by Richard Preston. So we did a little bit of a comparison with that. So again, the word counts are pretty similar. Richard Preston is coming in at a little under 120,000 words, right there in line with Jurassic Park and micro. His and frequency, 2.4 for the Cobra event. His narrative index, 15, which is where it really started to kind of make sense, because we have Crichton, who by himself is very, very powerful. Micro is kind of middling.
Hola.
And then Cobra event, we see it's not nearly on the same level. So this is where my dad and I in tons of conversations have said the conclusion, yeah, if you find the manuscript of a deceased author or an incomplete manuscript of whatever, and that author is not able to produce it, maybe just leave it alone. Leave it alone.
And going back to the numbers, this sort of illustrates what we talk about, accurate versus precise. And what I would say, looking at the narrative index, there's yeah, keep that up there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Looking at those scores for narrative index, and in our minds removing the percentage sign there, because yeah, it's not
Sorry.
for any of those. That's okay. But what I would say there is that it's micro and Cobra 19 versus 15. It's not that precise that I would feel confident thinking there's a difference there. But that scale of difference versus 28, I think that's pretty accurate. And yeah, I think we can say pretty confidently that you can see it there. Crichton knew how to just make the action hurtle forward, and these guys didn't. And I think that I would have a fair amount of confidence in that difference there. Interesting. Just as a side little piece of commentary, Liz, in the year or so now that you've been working with these metrics, in the beginning, I'm sure you were like, what is this thing? But nowadays, your confidence level is getting pretty strong that these things really are revealing genuine patterns that a lot of people should be aware of. I might have told everybody about it 2 months ago. I had a chat with my editor at University of Chicago Press, who 10 years ago when I did my Houston book, they assigned her as the editor because they were so excited about it. They thought it was going to be a bestseller or something. We missed the boat on that, but she was their best editor. She's been there for about 20 years. And she took almost no interest in this, and she said she went to lunch with another editor and told him about it. And he just sort of said, yeah, that's what you'd expect. For some reason, I think their brains are so holistically molded that something this, quote, reductionist just doesn't gather their interest when it should. And maybe it does for more analytical types. I don't know. People got thoughts on those numbers there for?
I can bring them back up if needed.
Andy Reynolds, you got a question?
Yeah, on that criticism that this is all too reductive, it seems to me that maybe ABT aficionados use the A, the B, and the T too promiscuously, and outer circle people hear it too narrowly, because we all know that ABT is really about Charles Delahunt put this beautifully. It sort of clicked for me when Charles said one time, the and material is all about establishing or helping people know that you're on their side. And to me, that sort of means, officially, the A stands for agreement. But to me, another C word, I've always been trying to get to 3 C's. If we could label this whole model alliteratively, is it community, conflict, and consequence? Is it commonwealth, conflict, and consequence? Something like that. Just the idea of coming together. I suspect that people who dismiss this entire way of thinking, and I do think Matthew has made this point before, this isn't just communication training. This is training you how to think in a productive, pragmatic way. I think people may get too locked in on the literalness of, God damn it, you want me to obsess over the word and? Are you kidding me? I'm too smart for that. No, you missed the point. It's not just literally about and is an indicator. We're talking about how much kind of togetherness are you creating up front? Then how much sort of sense of Sturm und Drang or, conflict are you creating in the middle? So,
let me toss back somewhat not against that, but as a parallel, because I've certainly spent 20 some years thinking about this divide that you're talking about there. My earlier experience was with the term shifting baselines and the editorial I wrote on it that really helped light up a whole discipline that today you go to the Wikipedia page on shifting baselines. And in the 23 years since my editorial came out, there are tons and tons of articles now that have applied it in the conservation world. And there was zero literature previous to that. It was Jeremy Jackson and Daniel Pauly brought the term to me, and I put it into that broader context. A year or so later, the term new normal came out. And new normal is the simpler, broader, easier application of shifting baselines. Everybody knows new normal. Shifting baselines is really only in the technical community, but there's so much weight and heft and strength to shifting baselines analytically. You can apply things that bring so much meaning with it. And I draw that as a parallel to what you're talking about there, because a lot of people have tried to come up with their alliterative 3 C's, or like you say, and there's other ones like that, especially in the business world. You can find a bunch of them in that one graphic that came out a couple months ago, 6 models for storytelling for CEOs, of which ABT was one of the 6 that was on. Somebody did it on LinkedIn. And I think a couple of the other ones were alliterative. The problem is when people are reaching for the alliterative things, they're giving up the strength of not having exactly the right term. And so that's the trade-off there. And with shifting baselines versus new normal is easier for everybody, but it doesn't have the specificity, and the word baselines is really powerful and brings with it all this meaning and significance analytically, what you ought to be doing. So I think that's a fork in the road on these things. And I see what you're saying on that. And yet there's so much depth and strength and power to and, but, and therefore, namely that and being in the top 5 words used in all English language day in and day out makes it very distinctive there and really powerful. There's a lot of meaning to that. And the same thing with but being number 15 to 25 in most surveys. Therefore is a whole different ball of wax. But those first 2 ones, and but, you're getting a lot more specific. The power of storytelling rests in the specifics. You're getting that from those 2 words, as opposed to trying to concoct 3 words that start with the same letter, something like that. Is that making sense, Andy? Just kind of.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
just coming from a marketing background, I always try to find the easiest, cleanest wedge. And
well, that's what I dealt with shifting baselines. Was I met with this big communications guru, and he said, nobody's going to get your term shifting baselines. You need to rename your campaign the Oceans Are in Trouble campaign. Well, I could have done that. It would have been non-memorable. And so that was the trade-off, is that 25 years later, shifting baselines is still razor sharp there with its own Wikipedia page because it had information content to it. But it did have that trade-off. It didn't instantly pick up like, oh, the Oceans Are in Trouble campaign. He gave me a whole lecture that day in his office about, this is too much inside baseball. Nobody will pick up on it. And then I said, I don't care. We're going with it. Those are endless challenges in communications. Something that's quick and propagates instantly, but doesn't have any heft to it, versus something that takes a little bit more muscle to propagate it, but it is going to have more staying power because of its depth.
Can I weigh in? And I agree with Andy that fundamentally an outside person will take ABT too literally. and kind of the brand is stuck, right? So there it is. But it's a fact that but is both a word and it captures an idea of contradiction very clearly. Those two are very closely allied, and therefore captures action or consequence very closely, and it's a word. Whereas and does not connect closely to that fundamental purpose of set up an agreement and dream. And so that is kind of the weak link in the ABT slogan, because A doesn't telegraph
but hang on,
the
let me
setup.
argue back on that, because I would argue for narrative that we're not talking about the inverted pyramid model for grabbing attention in the media world or in the journalism world. What we're talking about here is trying to begin with unity, and is the ultimate lubricant to get everybody agreeing on something. To before we're going to activate brains, we've got to get the channels open. And
Well,
that's the problem with journalism, is that it starts with
no,
activating
I
brains.
agree with that, but my
Yeah.
point is that and is not as tightly glued to that concept of agreement as but is to contradiction and therefore is to action. So when you look at ABT, people can say, yeah, but stands for contradiction, therefore stands for what do we got to do, but they don't say, oh, and stands for coming to agreement and setting up a dream.
Are you sure of that?
I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah.
I mean, there was one guy I met, Shirley introduced me to, one of the assistants there at AAAS, and this guy had been trained in telemarketing before he came to the science world. And he said there was this woman who she was called the and doctor. And that was her technique in telemarketing, was that and is this word of agreement that calms people down and gets them to unify with you. And this guy said they did whole workshops on the use of the word and. So and brings a lot of heft with it in that regard.
I'm going to pile in and agree with Charles on this, because remember, we're here at the tail end of an hour where we spent the entire first half hour talking about the use and color of the word and. Very inside circle. And I think what the argument Charles is making is, for people who don't get off on spending half an hour talking about the word and, it's a pretty bland word. It's on us to make that the case that that's not the case. But
that's
think
that's
that
it. It is it's because it's a bland word. It's a word of agreement. It doesn't activate the brain. You don't want to activate the brain before you get to, but you want to set the stage through agreement. You want to get everybody innocently buying in before you drop the bomb on. And by the way, before we run out of time here, just a monumental thing to note. I think last week was a major milestone in communication, in that Utah governor referring to social media as a cancer on our society. And it's been said by lots of people, but he said it in a single soundbite that got propagated all over the place. And I think that's true. And I think I'll be talking about this next week in Atlanta in this talk that I give, because in the Houston book, in the appendix, I pointed out that Twitter was too short of a format for communication to be able to include the and the therefore, the context and the consequence, and was going to select for contradiction and would not sustain itself. And that's what happened. A year later, they had to double the size, I think, to make it long enough to include a little bit of the setup and consequence. But here we are now at the point of it's emerging very clearly as just this horrible place that's all driven by contradiction, all driven by rage, everybody trying to grab attention, activate brains, and that turns it into this cesspool that's being referred to as. We got one or two last comments.
Basically what you have to do.
What's that?
If you want follows and likes,
yeah, right.
That's what you have to do. You basically have to throw crap at the wall.
And you do it through contradiction, but this, exactly. And we were worried we would run out of things to talk about in this hour. And in fact, we just barely got through Liz's stuff. I can't thank you all enough for these discussions. I mean, they're really, really fascinating. And sorry if I contradict people and push back or whatever, but that's part of driving the argument forward. Shirley, you want to give us one overall thought about the world of today?
I only got here after an audit meeting, okay? So I have been spending time listening to auditors for 45 minutes. So let me begin by saying I am thrilled to be out of the audit meeting. I am sorry I missed this meeting, but I will try not to do it again. So I must schedule more cleverly.
And yet you're going to be out of town next week when I'm in Atlanta. You're going to be
I'm sorry. We're trading places.
Trading places, exactly. But yeah, if you guys can put that on your schedule and try and tune in, see how that goes. But it should be a really fun meeting, and they're very excited. They're getting more. They had to switch the room. They had more than 50 signups for the in-person crowd, and lots of people coming over from CDC. And I'll be trying. I'm not going to be wildly incendiary, but I'm going to toss out a few things about. I mean, for me, the baseline is 15 years ago, I did 5 visits to CDC to do workshops, and there I was there in its finest hour, and it was a wonderful place, and everybody there just glowed about how wonderful. People have forgotten that there once was a time where CDC led our society. It really was a place that was admired.
Not just our society. Basically,
Yes.
CDC was the gold standard of
Yes.
public health around the world.
Yes.
And so it is essentially now been decimated.
Yeah. And one little anecdote I'll be telling there at the beginning of my talk was in the first visit I ever did there in August 2010, they gave me this booked up day, and twice during that day, somebody pulled me aside and said, and you know, every year we're number 2. They do this big survey and we always come in number 2. And it's a survey of what are the most trusted institutions in this entire country. And every year, number 1 is Fort Knox, but we figure that's because they've got all the gold. But after that, we're the number 1 most trusted. I swear to God, that's what it was in 2010. 15 years later, it's a complete train wreck. And the biomedical community has no idea how to deal with this. They're just stumbling around in shock. People at NIH that I tried to talk to 4 years ago when the RFK book came out, my friends at NIH told me, we've been instructed to not talk about this thing. It'll go away on its own. Guess what? That didn't happen. The guy's now king of the Maha world. So lots to talk about there next week, which is really sad. Yeah, Matthew, you can put the link in there?
Sure.
Everybody. And it'd be fun to come back and talk about that whole experience the next week, because
But it takes a lot, it takes a lot of spine to talk truth, to speak truth to power.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, isn't that true? More true today than ever before. And man, all of these people, I mean, even Stephen Colbert, where in the world are they finding the courage to stand up to what everybody knows is just, there's no limit to the consequences to what's going on. But anyhow, that's another hour's worth of discussion. Doug, do you have a final statement on that?
No, I'm good.
I saw you raising your hand.
Oh no, no, I did.
I feel like
hand was
we're
up, but I
biblical
wasn't
on
ready.
you guys.
Yeah. All right.
Hosea,
Tune in next
sow
week.
the wind, reap the whirlwind.
That's what we're gonna do, and I'm headed into it. So, all right. See you guys. Thanks. Always fun.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, gang.